my YouTube channel, A Radical Relationship, where we are talking all things faith and all things lifestyle. So today we are finishing up, or not finishing up, but continuing on in our Wisdom from the Bible series. Hopefully, if you've been following along with the series and you have the book, that has been a really great series, just in being able to get to know different women from the Bible, but also how can we see ourselves in their character for either good or bad, and then work towards whatever we need to work towards as a result of that. So if you're interested in the book, this is it. Available out on Amazon is where a few of the people that I know who have gotten the book bought it from. So let's dive in. So this week we are talking about Miriam. Miriam is the sister to Moses, and her chapter really focuses on how jealousy can be the thief to joy, and comparison can be the thief to joy. So her story can be found in Exodus chapters 2 and 15, and then Numbers chapter 20. And I think actually the name of the title is Don't Let Comparison Rob You of Your Joy. So there's that. So just to start out with kind of a little bit of background on Miriam, just from what I read about her in the book, she seems like someone who had to mature quickly, especially being an older sister. And if you're an older sister or an older sibling, you can probably think about some of the responsibility that rests on her. And then she went from being this leader, being in charge, being the older sister, helping to take care of her younger siblings, to Moses, specifically her younger brother, really rising to shine more than she was. He was shining more than she was. He kind of had more favor than she had with God. And so she started to get jealous. She started to get critical. She really wanted the gifts and talents that Moses had. And Moses, his story in the Bible, he was the man who led the people out of bondage, led the children of Israel out of Egypt, leading them to what was going to be the promised land. So he has this huge task, and she's like, what about me? So one of the points that the book makes is that comparison makes you delight in the fault of others, and you get critical. So when you are comparing yourself, you start to kind of anticipate and want the downfall of others so that you feel better about yourself, when really it's a thing with you and not a thing with other people. But that's what happens. I really appreciated one of the points that the book made about how with comparison, you're never going to win, because you're either going to be looking down on other people in order to puff yourself up, or you're going to be looking at other people feeling less than, and so it only makes you feel more insecure. So there really ain't no winning, sis, in doing that. And so one of the things that the chapter talked about was the only person you should be comparing yourself to is you. Comparing yourself to the version of you that you want to be, comparing yourself to the version of you that the Bible calls you to be, and trying to level up from that standpoint. Because as we mentioned, comparison is only going to get you one of two results: make you more critical or make you feel more insecure, and neither one of those is good, quite frankly. She talked about how comparison can damage your relationship with others. And there was this section where she said, like, although Moses still continued to pray for me, and he was still goodwill toward me, which spoke a lot to Moses's character. She was like, could still maybe feel that there was a level of mistrust there. And so that's the other thing, that like when something is funky in your heart and something is going on there, even if you don't speak on it, people can feel that and people can pick up on that. And then of course, if you go so far as to allow it to harm them in any way, even just emotionally, then it creates the mistrust where even if your friendship is mended or the relationship with that person is mended, is damaged to an extent. And so it's just a path that like you don't want to have to go down. She also talked about being capable does not equal being called. So stay in your lane, sis, basically. And it made me think about how the Bible tells us that all things are permissible but not beneficial. And so though it may be okay to do something, though you may have a little talent in that area, it doesn't mean that you should busy yourself with every little thing that you could be doing, which speaks to the point that you really want to have intention. You really want to be purposeful in what you're doing and what you're giving your attention to. Just because you can don't mean that you should. And I've had to learn that in my own life just by way of setting boundaries. Just because I have time don't mean I want to do it. And that's okay. But I used to be in a different space where I felt bad for saying no if I didn't have some type of legitimate reason. And legitimate is like I'm already doing something else for the most part. Even if it was just me taking the day to rest and maybe somebody called and ended up wanting something or whatever the case may be, I would feel bad saying no because I'm technically not doing anything. But the reality is I don't have to be. It's my time and I get to decide what I do with it. And so as it concerns just what we give ourselves to, just really trying to be intentional in that way. So girl got struck with leprosy. God really needed to teach homegirl a lesson because she was cutting up. And so in the book, from the perspective of that, she says, she mentioned having 7 days in quarantine to really think. And I was like, symbolism much? Because this book clearly was written way before this time. But to even see the word quarantine and for her to talk about like having time to think, I was like, that's exactly it is a situation that we've been in, but for months, like not just 7 days, for months. And so it made me think, okay, how can we apply that to today's time? How can we, like Miriam, use this time to reflect and think about what needs to be different? What needs to change? What is God drawing out of me? What is He calling me to? What are the realizations that I'm coming to in this time? And I appreciated that wisdom from Miriam, that she could see how that quarantine out from the camp, because she had leprosy, really helped her to be able to get in touch, that where she was at in her heart was not what's up. And so that's definitely a challenge from me to you all about how you're spending this time in quarantine. Is it truly about, hey, let me reflect and let me focus, let me take care of myself in the ways that I need to? Or are we sitting around just waiting for things to go back to normal, only to return to things that may have not even been beneficial to begin with, but because it's so routine and because it's so what we're used to, it's just easy to continue to hit play on that as opposed to write a new story with the way that we do our lives. So that's a challenge from me to you, okay? So I kind of asked myself, how can I relate to Miriam? What is it that I see in her that I'm like, yep, I understand that, I get that. And I'd done this YouTube video on unity in relationships. It's from the first series that I did on this book entitled Fervent. And in that video, I talk a lot about how she points out that Satan is divisive and he wants to get in there with your relationships and plant different seeds of discord so that you're not on the same page, even if it's not like this great falling out. Even if you're not on the same page and that's affecting things, then he still kind of wins. So be sure to go check that video out. I'll put a card up or link it here. But Miriam was used to being the person. Like, she was the go-to. She was the one who got things done. And so she placed a lot of her value in that. And I can be the same way. And I deemed Miriam like the classic codependent. Like, you thrive off of what you can do for everybody else, but so much so that you lose your sense of self and what it is that you want and you enjoy, because you're everything about what you do is driven from an external focus, in terms of like you're looking for what's acceptable and what people need than just like what you want for yourself. And I can definitely be that way. I'm the classic codependent as well, where I'm looking outward for my value. Let me figure out how I'm supposed to respond, who I'm supposed to be, what the good person would do, and let me just do it, which again, you lose so much of your true self in that and just become robotic kind of in your efforts. And then because she placed her value in that, everything is about other people. But then likewise, when the tables turned and it wasn't about her and people didn't need her like that, or whatever the case may be, then she made it about them as opposed to her own jealousy, her own critical nature. And I'm definitely critical in nature, is like by default. So I have to do better about working against those thoughts as well. But because she placed her value in what she could do for other people when they're moving on and all of that kind of stuff and don't necessarily need her, she's like, well, what am I supposed to be doing? And the answer is what God always told you to do, whatever that thing is. But because she was so busy looking at other people, she didn't remain in that space. And so the writer also talked about the parable of the talents, and that the reality is just that everybody ain't created equal in that way. Some people are more talented than others in certain areas, and that's okay. Like, to be more talented in one area of it or another doesn't diminish the next person. It simply means that we're different. And the parable of the talent talks about how he gave one person 10 talents. He gave one person 5 talents. He gave one person 1 talent. And the person with 10 talents went and multiplied. And the first person with 5 talents went and multiplied. And the person with 1 talent was like, oh, you only gave me 1. So I just went over here and buried it. And it was like, so you ain't even do nothing with the little bit that you had though? And again, because you're so concerned about what you don't have, that you're literally doing nothing with what you do have. That'll preach. And I'll put the scripture here and put it down below for you all to be able to go back and reference to. So let's end like we always do, looking at some of these discussion questions. So the discussion questions that I wanted to hit on are number 3. Are you naturally more inclined to compare yourself to people who are more talented than you, thus making yourself feel inadequate, or to people less talented in an attempt to validate yourself? And my answer for that is that I'm more inclined to compare myself to people who are more talented than me, because I'm a perfectionist. I'm super type A. I'm goal oriented. And so to see someone who's more talented than me, I'm like, okay, that's the goal. I need to be as good as them. It's not the goal. I need to be as good as me, but that's where I am. And I've just always been that like overachiever in so many ways. So it's easy for me to try to figure out what's the next goal that I should be working to. But to the point of the question, always will result in me feeling inadequate. Then you start feeling inadequate. You're like, well, I just shouldn't do it anyway. Da 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 da, and mission failed. The next question that I wanted to hit on was question 5. When do you find it easy to celebrate the successes of others? When do you find it difficult? Explain why. So it's easy to celebrate the successes of others when they're not better than mine. And it's like sad but true. Like, oh, if I don't feel like they're doing better than me, that's easy. I can celebrate that. But I find it difficult when I feel like, oh, they got a little more shine than I got, or they're doing better than I am, or whatever the case may be. So, yeah, I mean, that's like classic pride. That's the only thing to call that, because that's what it is. And so the way that I try to combat that is to like push myself to celebrate regardless. And that's one of those, like, my heart gonna have to catch up. I'm not gonna sit here and choose, even though like my heart may be jacked up in this area, I'm not gonna choose to not celebrate you for that reason. So I push myself to still do that, because that's what's good and pleasing to God, not to just sit in my bitterness. And then number 7, I won't necessarily go into answering, but I thought that it was a really good thought-provoking question. What God-given skill or ability do you possess that you take for granted? How can you better use it to serve others and glorify God? So I guess the only thing that I would say about that is, you know, as I've talked to different people about my YouTube channel, and there's always this like race for the numbers and views and that kind of thing, I've thought about, like, I don't necessarily know that like the increase of following is necessarily the goal, I think, for my channel, because it's spiritual content, is quality over quantity, because the goal is to have people who deepen in their walk with Christ as a result of my content. Not to have a lot of people, you know. And so those are things that we have to think about and consider, because it's definitely easy for me to compare my channel to other channels, you know, and what I need to do to get more followers and that kind of thing. But that's just not where I'm at with it right now. But that's a great question. A God-given skill or ability you possess that you take for granted, and how can you be more intentional about serving others and glorifying God with it, despite any negative thoughts. This was a really good chapter, y'all. Miriam is a really great example of, I think, kind of like the things that we bump up into with social media and that kind of thing, where we're always talking about how we see the highlights, you know, highlight reels of people's lives. And so it's easy to try to say where we think we should be based on that. But hopefully we all know by now, it is what it is. You don't know what's going on in people's lives behind the scenes, and you don't know what their portion is for real. So again, the only person you should be comparing yourself to is the version of you that God wants you to be. All right, so that's Miriam, y'all. Next week, we're actually going to be diving into Mary. So that's bound to be a good one, because we all know that her story is one of, not a miracle, but the miracle. So stay tuned for that. Hope that you all have been enjoying the series. And until next time, we are out. Bye, y'all.